What if I told you that Abraham Lincoln, remembered as one of the greatest presidents in American history, raised 4 sons, but only one of them lived long enough to grow old? We celebrate Lincoln as the great emancipator, the man who guided the Union through its darkest hour. His face looks out from the $5 bill, his words carved into monuments, his name etched into the very identity of America. But behind that towering figure stood a father, one who carried deep grief in his private life. Because the truth is, the story of Lincoln's children is one of tragedy, survival, and the crushing weight of a legacy too heavy for any child to carry. So, what happened to Abraham Lincoln's sons, Robert, Edward, Willie, and Tad? Their lives reveal an untold chapter of history, a story that begins with promise but ends with heartbreak. Let's uncover the hidden truth about the Lincoln children. The firstborn was Robert Todd Lincoln, was the child who carried both the promise and the burden of the Lincoln name. Born in 1843, he entered the world during a time of national tension. Unlike his younger brothers, who often ran free under their father's indulgent eye, Robert's childhood was more structured, more serious. He was sent away to private schools. And by the time the family moved into the White House, Robert was already a student at Harvard. This physical and emotional distance meant that Robert never developed the same playful bond with Abraham Lincoln that Willie and Tad enjoyed later. Robert himself admitted that his relationship with his father was more formal, even strained. While others saw Lincoln as a warm and affectionate man, Robert mostly knew him as a distant figure consumed by politics and war. When the Civil War broke out, Robert longed to serve. He was 18 at the time, and many of his classmates were already in uniform, but his parents resisted. Abraham and Mary, already scarred by Eddie's death, feared losing another son to war. For most of the conflict, Robert remained in college, watching as his classmates marched off to battle. This decision earned him whispers of cowardice, something that weighed heavily on him. Finally, in 1865, with the war nearly won, Abraham relented. Robert joined General Ulysses S. Grant's staff as a captain. Though he saw little direct combat, Robert was present at Appomattox when Lee surrendered. Standing just outside the room where the Confederacy collapsed, he was, in a way, a witness to the closing act of the war his father had fought so hard to win. But Robert's life was marked by something darker. Tragedy seemed to follow him. Just weeks after joining the army, he rushed to his father's side. At Peterson House, after Lincoln was shot, Robert was there watching his father slip away through the night until the morning came and Abraham Lincoln was gone. The image of that night never left him, and it would not be the last time he found himself at the center of national grief. In 1881, Robert was standing just feet away when President James Garfield was shot at a Washington train station. 2 decades later, in 1901, he was attending the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo when President William McKinley was assassinated. 3 presidents, 3 assassinations, and Robert Todd Lincoln connected to all of them. Newspapers began calling him a jinx, a man cursed by fate. To stand at history's darkest moments, he became so unnerved by this pattern that he eventually declined most presidential invitations, preferring to keep his distance from the White House. Yet Robert's life was far more than tragedy. After graduating from Harvard and studying law, at Columbia, he built a successful legal career. He entered politics, serving as Secretary of War under Presidents Garfield and Arthur, where he oversaw the modernization of the U.S. Army. Later, he served as U.S. Minister to Great Britain, representing the nation abroad at a time when America was beginning to flex its influence on the world stage. After returning home, Robert entered the business world and became president of the Pullman Company, the giant railroad car manufacturer. He held that post for decades, turning the company into one of the most powerful in the nation. But this success came at a cost. Was criticized during the Pullman strike of 1894, when federal troops were sent in to break a labor strike, leading to violence and deaths. For a man whose father was remembered as a symbol of freedom and equality, Robert's connection to one of the Gilded Age's bloodiest labor disputes cast a shadow on his legacy. On a personal level, Robert married Mary Harlan, the daughter of U.S. Senator James Harlan, in 1868. Together, they had 3 children, Mary, Abraham, and Jesse. For a time, it seemed the Lincoln name would continue, but history had other plans. Robert's only son, Abraham Lincoln, too nicknamed Jack, died at just 16 years old from an infection following surgery. His daughters married, but neither produced children who carried on the Lincoln name. By the mid-20th century, the direct descendants of Abraham Lincoln dwindled. In 1985, Robert's grandson, Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith, died without heirs, officially ending the bloodline of the 16th president. In his later years, Robert withdrew from public life. He settled at his estate in Manchester, Vermont, known as Hildon, surrounded by rolling hills and quiet gardens. Robert spent his final years away from the spotlight that had so often brought him sorrow. He died in 1926 at the age of 82, the only Lincoln child to live a full lifespan. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, not far from the home his father had once looked out upon before it became a national shrine. Robert Todd Lincoln lived a life at once extraordinary and overshadowed. He carried the Lincoln name with dignity, achieved high office, and built wealth and influence. Yet he was haunted by tragedy, defined by coincidence, and ultimately left with the knowledge that the bloodline of one of America's greatest presidents would end with him, the second son, Edward Baker Lincoln, before the White House. Before the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd endured their first great family tragedy. On March 10, 1846, their second child was born in Springfield, Illinois. Edward Baker Lincoln, named after Abraham's close friend, Senator Edward Dickinson, Baker of Oregon, the choice of name reflected the deep bond between Lincoln and Baker, who would later die in the Civil War at the Battle of Ball's Bluff. Little Eddie was remembered as gentle, affectionate, and bright, but he was also frail. In the mid-19th century, childhood diseases struck without warning, and the Lincoln household was no exception. Eddie often fell ill, and by the winter of 1849 to 1850, his condition worsened. Some accounts suggest tuberculosis, while others mention chronic wasting disease, which could have been prolonged illness from poor nutrition or infection. On February 1, 1850, just shy of his 4th birthday, Eddie died in the family's Springfield home. His death left Mary Todd inconsolable. She wrote poems and letters filled with grief, mourning the child she believed had been too pure, too gentle for earth. Abraham, though less demonstrative in public, was deeply shaken. He buried himself in work, a pattern he would repeat. With each loss, Eddie's small gravestone read simply, Eddie Lincoln, son of A&M Lincoln. For the Lincolns, this was the first reminder that even in their modest rising political life, tragedy did not spare them. Eddie's death foreshadowed the heartbreak that would haunt the family again and again. Then there was William Wallace Lincoln. If Eddie's loss was devastating, the death of William Wallace, Willie Lincoln, was earth-shattering. Born on December 21, 1850, Willie was Abraham's third son, and the one who most resembled his father in looks, in intellect, and in temperament. He was thoughtful, curious, and unusually mature for his age. Many friends of the family remarked that Willie seemed destined for great things. When the Lincolns entered the White House in 1861, Willie and his younger brother Tad transformed it into their personal playground. They slid down banisters, played pranks on cabinet members, and even set up a pretend theater where they staged little plays for their father's amusement. Abraham, often weary from the war, indulged them. He let them interrupt meetings and bring life to rooms filled with the gloom of military reports. But Washington, D.C., was a city plagued by disease. Its water supply was contaminated, its sanitation poor. In early 1862, Willie and Tad both fell sick, most likely with typhoid fever. For weeks, the boys lay in bed as doctors tried everything they could. Tad slowly recovered, but Willie grew weaker. On February 20, 1862, Willie died at the age of just 11. The impact was shattering. Abraham was inconsolable. Visitors to the White House recalled him pacing the halls late at night, whispering prayers. One clergyman remembered Lincoln saying, "My poor boy, he was too good for this earth. The good Lord has called him home." Mary Todd Lincoln was devastated to the point of collapse. She could not attend Willie's funeral. Overcome with grief that would haunt her for the rest of her life, historians often argue that Willie's death marked a turning point for Abraham Lincoln. Already bearing the crushing weight of a divided nation, the loss of his beloved son deepened his sorrow, leaving him with an almost spiritual resignation. It was during this time that Lincoln began speaking more frequently of God's will, as if Willie's death forced him to see the war itself as a divine test. The youngest, Lincoln's son, Thomas Lincoln, was born on April 4, 1853. His large head as an infant earned him the nickname Tad, short for tadpole, and the name stuck for the rest of his life. Unlike Robert, Eddie, and Willie, Tad was different from the start. He had a speech impediment that made him difficult to understand. His teeth were misaligned, giving him a lisp. He also suffered from health problems, possibly cleft palate, or a related condition. Schooling was nearly impossible. Teachers struggled to manage him, and he never learned to read or write properly. But what Tad lacked in formal education, he made up for in pure spirit. Tad was energetic, mischievous, and deeply affectionate toward his father. He roamed the White House freely, bursting into meetings, tugging on his father's coat, and demanding attention from generals and cabinet members alike. To some, this was disruptive. But to Abraham Lincoln, Tad was a source of light. He let the boy climb onto his shoulders, whisper into his ear during council sessions, and sit beside him at dinners. White House staff recalled how deeply devoted Abraham was to Tad, calling him his little shadow. But, like his brothers before him, Tad's life was marked by tragedy. In April 1865, at just 12 years old, Tad was preparing to attend a play with his father when news came that Abraham would instead be going to Ford's Theater with Mary. That night, Lincoln was shot. When the news reached Tad, he wept uncontrollably, crying out, "They've killed Papa! They've killed Papa!" From that moment, Tad's world collapsed. After the assassination, Tad and Mary moved to Chicago, where they lived in relative seclusion. Tad grew into a kind-hearted teenager, but his health never improved. In 1868, Mary took him to Europe, hoping the climate might help him. For a time, Tad flourished there, even dressing in military-style uniforms and learning bits of foreign languages. But in 1871, while living in Chicago, Tad became gravely ill once again. Tuberculosis was the likely cause. He died on July 15, 1871, at just 18 years old. For Mary Todd Lincoln, it was another devastating blow. She had now buried 3 of her 4 sons, leaving only Robert alive. Tad's short but spirited life ended with him remembered as the boy who brought joy to Abraham Lincoln's darkest days. So what truly became of Abraham Lincoln's children? Edward died at just 4 years old. Willie died at 11. Tad died at 18. Only Robert lived to see adulthood, carrying his father's name and legacy into the 20th century. But even Robert's descendants would not last forever. His last direct heir, Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith, died in 1985 without children, marking the end of Abraham Lincoln's bloodline. The story of Lincoln's sons is more than a family history. It is a reminder of how greatness often comes with extraordinary sacrifice. Abraham Lincoln saved the Union, but in his personal life, he endured losses that no parent should have to bear. His children lived and died in the shadow of one of history's greatest names, their own struggles and tragedies hidden behind their father's towering legacy. So, let me ask you this. If you were born the child of Abraham Lincoln, would you embrace the burden of that legacy, or would you try to escape its shadow? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story of Lincoln's children fascinating, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more untold stories from history, and check the description for links to other videos that reveal the hidden side of the past.